Picking the right creek in April can be the difference between catching a pile of fish or struggling to get a bite. In this video, I'm going to share my approach for finding the most productive creeks on your lake so you can catch a lot of fish this April. Let's get into it. Today I'm on Table Rock Lake in Missouri. It's the end of March, and a recent warming trend has raised water temperatures from the mid-40s to the low 60s in just over a week. Most of the bass are still in their late winter or early pre-spawn modes, but I decided to head up the river to try to find some dirtier, warmer water where some big pre-spawn bass were setting up.
Good one. That thing thumped the crap out of it. Good fish on a jig here. Oh, there we go. First fish up this river flipping, guys. I broke off one even bigger than this earlier. What is up? Welcome back to Fish in the Moments. That fish chomped that jig. 11/16 ounce jewel tactical flipping jig on a rocky wall here. Really solid fish. Solid 2.5 pounder on that jig. You cannot beat a jig bite, guys. That is absolutely awesome. Just crack that guy here. Oh, beautiful fish right there. Let's get back down the lake. That's what I'm talking about, guys.
Now let me explain how I picked the bank where I just caught this fish. As I mentioned earlier, I'm fishing up one of the major river arms on Table Rock Lake. The main lake has relatively clear and deep water, but these river arms are shallower and muddier. This shallow, muddy water is going to warm up quicker when you have warming trends. This means the water temperature on the main lake is in the mid-50s, while the water temperature up this river is in the low 60s. That warmer water is going to cause bass to move up to the banks and allow me to target them with baits like a jig or a spinnerbait or a crankbait. After picking this river section in general, I needed to figure out a specific spot to start in. Based on past experience, I find that I get the most bites and have the most success targeting medium-sized creeks in these river arms. You can catch fish in smaller pockets and coves, but there's usually not as many fish in those areas. So if you can find a medium-sized creek that's not too big, you can oftentimes find more fish. You don't want a creek that's too large though, because it takes a lot of time to break that down. So I picked a medium-sized creek that I could cover in less than 30 minutes and shows a nice rocky bank with some rock transitions on it.
There we go, guys. Big jig with some big line fishing down this rocky bank. That's awesome. We are here on Table Rock in the end of March. Water temperature is actually 63 degrees up the river here, and I figured there would be some bass moving up onto some of these rock transition banks I can catch on a jig. I did break off one really good one pretty much at the end of a transition bank earlier in a very similar creek, and it felt like a fish that was the same size or bigger of the one that I just caught. And a lot of times this time of year, when you're kind of a little bit ahead of the fish, I wouldn't say that the majority of the fish are on the bank. I'd say a lot of them are still actually pre-spawn. You're going to get some really good bites on this jig, just not very many. And so we're gonna keep fishing through here, see if we can pick up a fish or two every stretch, because if we do, we're gonna have a pretty big bag. Got him. Here we go. Another one on the jig here. Not a big one, but another fish on the same bank. This bank might have a few more fish on it. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go, guys. Nice little spotted bass right there. Not a big one, but another fish off this bank. Got that fish on a slightly different jig. This is actually a little prototype core tackle jig that we're working on, and just kind of making my way down this bank. The last couple of fish have come on the actual rock itself, not around any of the laydowns or stick-ups down this bank. So that's kind of interesting. And they've also come pretty close to the bank. That's one thing that I like to pay attention to when I'm fishing down these banks, is how far off the bank I'm getting my bites. And the reason I'm actually throwing a heavier jig, this is actually a 5/8 ounce jig, and the other jig was an 11/16 ounce, is because I want to get that bait down in those rocks and down the different levels of this bank. A lot of these 45-degree chunk rock banks are gonna have multiple stages to them. They'll stick out maybe a couple feet out, then drop sharply down to 3 to 5 feet. Then they're gonna drop from 5 feet down to 8 feet. And by using a heavier jig, like a 5/8 ounce or an 11/16 ounce, you can fish that super shallow section in 0 to 2 foot, and then quickly get that bait down to that 3 to 5 foot zone, then to the 5 to 8 foot zone, all in one cast, and determine where those fish are. Now, from what I can tell right now, it seems like those fish are right on that transition from that 2 foot zone to the 3 to 5 foot zone down this bank. And so I'm going to really focus on that. I might even go to a little bit lighter bait just because I now know I don't need to get that bait down there like 8 feet. Now, one thing that's interesting here is this bank transitioned back more into ledge rock compared to the chunk rock where I got my last 2 bites. And I actually think that the 2 fish I caught were right on that transition from that chunk rock to this ledge rock. The other fish that I broke off earlier was on a transition from chunk rock to pea gravel. So these fish may just be on these transitions more so than a specific type of rock, but I'm gonna kind of keep fishing all of it just to keep them honest. I will start running specific transitions once I get a few more bites, let's say 4 or 5 bites, and I know they're on specific transitions. But until then, I don't like to count anything out because you could pull up to a stretch like this of ledge rock and catch 2 4-pounders, boom, boom. And if you just only run the transitions, you'd completely miss that. But if I get 1 more bite or 2 more bites on this next transition, then we know that's the pattern and we can skip a lot of this stuff on the next spot we fish. And when I'm working down these rock banks, one tip I can have is to try to cast at a 45-degree angle to these rocks. What that will do is keep your bait in the strike zone just a little bit longer as opposed to going directly 90 degrees into the bank. It'll also allow you to work a little bit ahead of the boat, which will keep you just a bit further away in terms of trolling motor noise and getting right on top of these fish. It's a small change that doesn't seem like it would make that big of a difference, but I find it does help get maybe a couple more bites throughout the day versus, you know, for example, if I was just fishing on this bank, I could fish directly 90 degrees to the bank, maybe even put my boat further off, but you're bringing that bait through that strike zone so quickly in that situation versus if I'm pitching ahead of the boat and get that bait 45 degrees out, it stays in that each zone, that 0 to 2 foot, 3 to 5 foot, and so on, a little bit longer. And I just missed one right there. Dang it. I'm sitting here talking and explaining and missing fish. That was not good. Okay, so I'm reaching the end of the steeper section here, and we're actually transitioning to a flatter stretch in the back of this creek. And so I'm gonna switch away from the heavier jig, that 5/8 ounce jig, and go to something a little bit lighter. This is actually what I broke the fish off on earlier. It is the Core Tackle 4/0 3/16 ounce Ozark rig on a Yamamoto Flappin' Hog. And I really like anywhere from like a 3/16 to a 1/4 ounce bait when I'm working these flatter stretches that have maybe smaller rock, even pea gravel, just because you're not going to have as sharp of a drop off. And as a result, you don't need a bait that falls super fast. And actually, a faster falling bait can sometimes spook the fish when they're up in these shallower stretches. So I go to a little bit lighter bait. I also like this Ozark rig for the fact that it kind of glides around a little bit more and gives these fish something different from a standard Texas rig that just falls straight to the bottom. So it'll kind of hang in front of their face just a little bit longer. One thing I'm annoyed about right now is the amount of turtles down this bank. Every time I get to it seems like a really good stretch, there's turtles everywhere hitting the water. And I don't know if that hurts the fishing or not. Let me know down in the comments what you think about turtles, but I always feel like it is not helping my situation, but who knows? Maybe fish aren't bothered by the turtles. It just maybe bothers me more than anything. Got him. There we go. Another good one on the jig. Barely felt that fish. Nice fish. Actually came back to the stretch where I caught that first largemouth here and got this one right here. Just thought that maybe there were some fish on the way out here because I fished all the way to the back and didn't get any bites, and it was a good call to come back out here. I basically started right where I caught that first fish and started going the opposite direction out of this creek, and we got to another little rock transition area. It transitioned from some chunk rock to some ledge rock, exactly what we saw with the last couple of fish, and now I'm pretty confident that these fish are right on these transition zones, exactly where you would think they would be, transitioning from one type of rock to another. It doesn't really seem to matter what type of rock they're transitioning from and to, because I've had bites on 3 different types of transitions. It's just that there is a transition is the key, and it's interesting because I've had bites kind of in the first half of the creeks, the back half of the creeks. So I still haven't really fully got dialed in on exactly what I should be doing in terms of where I should be fishing, but at least we're getting bit pretty consistently here. I've only been doing this for like an hour and a half-ish and have 4 bites so far. Got 3 in the boat, so pretty solid so far. And one thing I'll call out is that all the fish I've caught so far have not been big ones by any means. I think the one I broke off was a pretty good one, but a lot of times it comes down to finding the right section of the lake that you need to be in. So for example, right now we're up the Kings River on Table Rock, and the Kings River isn't known for having the biggest fish in it. So if I was doing the same pattern up the James River or Long Creek, for example, I might be able to be catching 3 to 4 pounders instead of just like 1.5 to 2.5 pounders. And right now I can't make a run from here to the James. That would take like an hour run, but it's just something to note because a lot of times if this pattern is happening in one river arm, it'll also be happening in another. And just on certain lakes, some river arms hold bigger fish than others. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's one of those things that's more of a strategic decision when you head to the lake. I actually wanted to come to this part of the lake today because I could catch some fish offshore, which I did this morning and did an uncut video. And then I could also come up the river and kind of do both, where if I went up the James River, I would be locked into basically only fishing this one style. So from a strategic standpoint, it was kind of nice that I could do multiple things. But if I was fishing a tournament today, I probably would have just gone up the James River, done this exact pattern, and I feel like I'd have had a really good shot of catching 18 to 20 pounds a day doing this. But I'm still getting bit, I'm still having a lot of fun. I don't care if I'm catching 2 pounders in a jig or 4 pounders, as long as I'm setting the hook on a jig, I'm happy. Oh, good one. There we go. I went shallow laydown, switched it up a little bit on them, pulled out the Ozark rig and came on with some of these super shallow laydowns because I wasn't having success getting in any of these creeks. They were covered up. Nice little fish there, all spotted up, beautiful. Just little males, they're kind of just moving up here, but let me get off this tree. There's a really good stretch of laydowns here, and I can actually see the bottom in some places, but these fish will set up even in this clear water on these shallow laydowns and stuff like this. And it's not super clear. It's actually probably pretty dirty compared to what you would expect for Table Rock, but in general, it's like probably 3 foot of visibility, and these fish are just going to set up and spawn on this inside curve of the main channel. There's actually a really good offshore ledge spot that they'll set up on later in the year out here. And so I know a population of fish live around this area and they have to spawn somewhere, and this is where they're going to spawn, just in around all these laydowns. There's some really nice pea gravel in this area as well. All that pea gravel is great for bass to spawn around, and there's great cover for them with all these laydowns. So everything a bass needs is right here, and pretty quick. We just got a bite within 2-3 minutes of doing this, so that's a good sign. Well guys, I'm gonna call it a day here, but before I do, I wanna walk you through all the equipment I was using today. First up, my jigs. I threw several today. One of them was this Jewel 11/16 tactical flipping jig. Another was this motion fishing 1/2 ounce flipping jig. I was using the heavier jig when I was fishing in the beginning to figure out how deep I need to be fishing, from, again, 0 feet out to like 8 to 10 feet. But once I realized those fish were setting up shallower in that 2 to 5 foot zone, I went to a 1/2 ounce flipping jig, just because I like to have a lighter jig if possible when I kind of started to get dialed in. I was throwing both those in like a green pumpkin-ish color and pairing that with a green pumpkin Big Bite Baits College Crawl. This is my favorite little trailer, not very expensive, and it works super well in the back of a jig this time of year. I was also throwing a prototype core tackle jig as well, but we're not going to show that one quite yet. And speaking of core tackle, I also got a fish on the core tackle Ozark rig, as well as broke off a really nice fish that I wish I gotten in the boat. This is the 4/0 3/16 ounce Ozark rig. It comes through cover unbelievably well, guys, with that Yamamoto flapping hog on the back, and it's great when you're fishing in super shallow laydowns and shallower stretches that I was getting into. The one fish I broke off was in the very back of a creek, and it was on a really shallow stretch, and that Ozark rig will just glide that bait, especially a creature hog or a, I guess, beaver style bait, like a reaction innovation sweet beaver or this Yamaha flapping hog, it just glides that bait around super well, hangs it in front of those fish's face, and I get a ton of bites on it. I was pairing that Ozark rig on the Denali Lithium Pro 7'4" medium heavy power fast action worm and jig rod with this new reel that I was given at the Bassmaster Classic from Baits. It's the Baits Hundo. It's like the nicest reel I own by like tenfold. So I'm giving it a shot. I appreciate the guys hooking me up with one of these. I will give a full review later. I don't like to talk about stuff too much until I've used it quite a bit. So we'll talk about that later, but this just has some 15-pound fluorocarbon on it. And that was kind of my Ozark rig setup. And then for my jigs, I was throwing a Denali Lithium Pro 7'4" heavy power fast action worm and jig rod. So that heavy power rod with my jigs, and then the medium heavy power rod with my Ozark rig or Texas rigs, the lighter baits. I had this with a Abu Garcia Max Pro. I picked up at Academy or Walmart or something a long time ago. So it's just an old reel, 7-to-1 gear ratio, and this is just some 20-pound fluorocarbon. So nothing fancy in terms of that, but it was a lot of fun actually getting out here, setting the hook on some of these fish. I love the jig bite, just dropping that bait down there, seeing your line jump, and even though we didn't catch any big ones, it was just a lot of fun. And this bite's happening right now and will happen all the way through April. You just have to figure out where they are on those walls, and there's gonna be certain creeks and certain pockets and things that are holding more fish. We actually got the majority of our bites down one stretch of bank, and the rest of the stretches weren't all that great. So you just have to keep hunting around. Once you find a good stretch that has a group of fish that's pulled up and kind of ready to get in that pre-spawn / spawning mode, you'll catch them pretty quick. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and learned something. If you did, make sure you leave a comment down below. And other than that, we'll see you all next video.